back and live. Nick, Ben,
And
our special guest, very special guest, Adam Grant, the one and the only.
Howdy, everybody.
Adam,
Thanks for having me.
A lot of people may or may not know this. I mean, Ben and I have mentioned it several times, but you were solely responsible for getting Ad Hominem up and running at the very beginning. So you, and give credit to Manny, obviously, as well. Manny Deco, big shout out to Manny, helped sort of catapult this whole crazy idea of me and Ben getting on and spewing our opinions on things. And it's now transformed into this where we have you on as a guest. Who'd have thought?
Yeah, I love the open debate style that you guys have, or just like about talking about things from different viewpoints in a non-accusatory or mean manner. So it's a pleasure to come on and talk to you guys instead of being behind the scenes recording it.
Yeah, for sure. It's our pleasure to have you. So as I mentioned, I guess I could intro you and find out. Typically, how we start these things is to find out a little bit more about our guest, right? So give us a little bit of background. I mean, obviously, spoiler alert, Ben's going to know most of this stuff, but maybe tell us, a little bit about where you're from, where you've been, perhaps a little bit about where you're going, things like that.
Yeah, sure. Born and raised in New Hampshire. Got my degree from UNH in economics. Bounced around different offices doing software sales and academic advising and things like that. Then started my own little construction business. So the past year and a half I've been doing that. I've traveled to 44 states. Got certified to be a yoga instructor in Hawaii. Basically a jack of all trades, tried every job under the sun and love trying more. So, I'm definitely your very average young man in the United States, I'd say.
I think, I don't know, Ben, you can speak to this, but I think Adam's selling himself a little bit short here because he is a jack of all trades. But Adam, you're very insightful in a lot of ways too. Like you provide good value and good insight into a bunch of different things. So average, I don't know, because I would think that the average person isn't that way. That would be my art, especially the average millennial, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they're, when you talk about the average person, I mean, that's the person that wants to just find a job and settle down, right? I mean, one thing that I've always respected about you is the fact that you have always wanted to travel and try out a different 1,000 different jobs. See what you enjoy doing. And so, with that being said, obviously, we were talking before the show started, your plan is to travel again, coming up here at the end of June. We've talked a little bit about the reopenings in North Carolina, in New Hampshire. What are some of your general thoughts on COVID-19, how you've been handling it, getting ready to travel, what that looks like as the country reopens the economy after the initial spike in this pandemic?
Yeah, so at first I was super pissed that everything closed down because I was supposed to leave. So from my bias, I was pretty critical of the whole thing when it first broke. But I think at this point, I view it more as the safety of others. Like if I were to get it and didn't know I had it and was transmitting it and just going around kind of like I was watching the game live when Rudy Gobert was doing all the pregame antics and was giving it to everybody. And I thought some terrorist attack was going on in the Utah Jazz arena because they were just like, everybody just stay in the seats for now and we'll let you know what's going on. And I had my DraftKings lineups loaded and I was like, okay, all right. And then 20 minutes after they sent everybody home, it started becoming real to me that I might have to change my trip. But I think it was important to even go through this whole process in disaster planning for the United States because it seemed like we were very taken aback when something like this happened. We've been pretty fortunate in our generations not to have any besides from obviously 9/11 or the Boston bombing, nothing serious happened on our own soil where hospitals would have to react and resources would need to be, allocated quickly and things like that. So I think even just that process has benefited the country. But now it's interesting from an economic standpoint, and I'd like to hear even your guys' thoughts, because I want sports back. I know most people want sports back, and I was saying how upset I'd be if the NFL didn't come back, and then it's kind of like, but do I want it back because it's good for the country and good for the economy and I love football and everything like that, or should we really pump the brakes and wait to see? I don't know. Is integration let everybody get the disease and see what happens? Is that the next step?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I think it's a good point, and we do need to see how the information changes. Recent information posted on the CDC website suggests that when you consider the actual mortality rate right now is 0.4%, and you also factor in the fact that scientifically they've now come to a consensus that you have about a 35% chance of having COVID-19 without even knowing it, being asymptomatic. That infected mortality rate actually goes down to about 0.26%. So obviously, in terms of the idea of everybody getting it, I think it really is going to depend on how the hospital scene looks, whether them being overwhelmed is still an issue or whether we're prepared for that now, and whether that mortality rate, that death rate increases based on does it mutate? Are there different issues that come up post having COVID-19? Are there complications after the fact where lung capacity or whatever else is affected just from having it? I think that is important to consider when we talk about sports coming back, because obviously you're talking about athletes and their livelihoods. Nick, how do you feel about that?
Oh man, economically speaking, right? So I'm in an area, as you both know, I'm in an area where, so I'm in software sales. That's like the profession that I'm in right now. Adam, I know you're familiar with that neck of the woods too. And I cover the entire Southeast region as far as software sales for the company I work for. And in my region in particular, especially, you have a state like North Carolina, who was the quickest to react in the nation as far as issuing a stay-at-home order and all of these sort of things. Even before New York City, North Carolina acted very quickly. And then you have a state, just down the road in Georgia, who basically took we're not worried about the next flu approach, right? And they had huge spikes, and then they tried shutting everything down basically towards the end of March, and then dramatically reopening things several weeks ago. And I mean, when I say reopening, not in phases,
no, full on, yeah,
full on, hey, make sure your hand sanitizer's out and make sure you got wipies, and we're gonna let you just live your life because we need to get the economy back rolling in the state. And now they've seen, to your point about the CDC, Ben, now they've seen dramatic increases in rates, almost daily numbers that continue to rise. So as far as on, I guess, economically, or, as far as the economy, what I hear from folks, right, when I'm trying to sell is we're not really spending anything right now. Yeah, we have some money. We're not really spending anything right now because we don't know what the fall is going to look like. The speculation is this thing's going to turn back up in the fall, and that's scaring us a little bit. So even though we have money now, we might need money come fall. That's the business side of things. Sports, I think we're going to be a little bit fortunate. I think it's going to be weird. You see, soccer, for example, a sport that I know and I love, and they're playing with empty stadiums. I think in an NFL type setting, that's going to be really weird to see, but I think that's the most likely scenario. Not just with the NFL, but probably with all sports. I can see you, moving around uncomfortably. I'm curious. You don't like that take.
Just the language. I assume what they say on the field is not very friendly. I mean, I'd love to hear what's going on down there, but just obviously, even when you get snapshots of what people say, you're like, oh, did you just hear what he said?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's been super interesting to me, even like working from home and all the things that have been like, oh, you can work from home 2 days a week, and now it's like when everybody's forced to work solely from home, pretty much. Like, obviously, it depends on what you think of global warming and everything like that, but I'm just under the impression that we need to kind of start making some of the changes that were started. Like, if you don't need to drive into work, if we can save even the emissions from that, so that people can work from home, or people can work from home because they have young children or anything like that, it just seems so unnecessary. Like, even to the idea of like, how many loans do you have taken out, and if the economy were to take a hit like this, how affected are you by that? Are you in the negative, are you in the positive? And you've seen that, like, we've needed the government to prop up so many people right now in terms of unemployment rate, who's applying for unemployment, making sure that everybody's covered, making sure. So if we're planning on something like this happening in the future, how many times could we go through something like this? How many times could the global economy go through something like this and still maintain infrastructure? Because it's seeming like money is more and more fake. I mean, obviously, when we went to the fiat system, money became fake. It wasn't on the gold standard anymore. But I mean that it's like, if we aren't jacking up the value of the dollar right now and completely annihilating the economy, I'm curious to see how we're not. You know what I mean? Like, how we're going to recover from this in a way that isn't just future generations paying the price for it. So that's kind of like an unanswered question that I'm curious about.
Yeah, no, it's a great take, and I wonder if, when I start putting on my tinfoil hat, I wonder if that has something to do with it. I mean, you've got a lot of the government stimulus going to some of the bigger corporations. Somehow it's fine for people to jam inside of a Walmart. But small businesses can't open. You can't go to the gym and be healthy. Do you see any other room for? I know you did mention, in terms of how things can change and affect the environment. Do you see any other opportunities for reform, especially when you consider, small business owners? Some of these small business owners have built something over the last, 2, 3, 4, 5 decades. And are close to seeing it all go away, unless this country reopens kind of in a similar fashion to what was considered normal pre-pandemic. Do you see any options for reform, as far as an economic standpoint or a societal standpoint?
That's like the question I asked myself the other day was like, does Adam Smith's invisible hand even exist anymore? Like, wow. You hear about all of the bailouts that happen and all of the effort paid towards keeping these big businesses afloat, but it's like, shouldn't they all have died then? If a huge business can't sustain itself in a non-perfect economy, doesn't it deserve to die? Which is a weird question, because then people are like, well, think about all the jobs that are lost. It's like, right, and gained by mom and pop stores. Like, then you'll see all of those mom and pop stores that we lost in that huge surge of Walmart and everything. Like, there used to be Bradley's and Kmart, even though those are still sort of big stores. Walmart just destroyed everything in its path.
Right.
In its path. Hardware stores, the little ones, like, everything's gone. So it's like, you could, back in the day, like, down in Manchester, and I'm sure this is free online marketing for them, so they wouldn't mind, but that Stills lawnmower repair. Yeah, it's been there for like 70 years, but it's part of the people's home. So if in this economy it can't open, that's okay. It's just part of our home. Like, we don't need to pay rent on anything. It's manageable. We've had this business for years. We know how to run it. Obviously, no one's getting their stuff fixed right now, but as soon as the yard, blah, 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 blah. But a Walmart that needs to rent out 685 locations within a 200 square mile is obviously going to be panicking and like, what do we do? And leaving stores open, which is putting the entire country at risk of getting a disease. So that's the interesting thing to me. It's like, by propping these companies up, we're enhancing the chance that a lot of people will need to go to one location. We're keeping businesses afloat that can't sustain themselves in a crippling economy when there's big things like this going on, which global warming or anything like that could lead to more collapses. And then on top of that, it's like it's not even going by the actual laws of economics that would allow for the innovation you're talking about, or the next movement of businesses to come in with a new model being like, okay, this is how we could perform business. And like working from home. Everybody works from home. Everybody. We don't have a physical office location. It's all done online. That way, when there's an economic collapse, you're not forced to pay rent. You're just like, okay, well, got to keep the system running, but that's it. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah. That's a very unaverage take, I would say.
Well, hey,
I mean,
I'm above average in my takes. That's it.
No, so I would. I think for me it is very interesting, because I think about the reform thing as well, right? Like, I think about like the sort of the collateral damage effect of propping up these businesses and things like that, that you had mentioned. But it is interesting too, from the standpoint of where we are, right? And when I say we, I mean like you, me, Ben, as really like the next quote unquote professional sort of business people moving up in our careers and figuring out how we can make this economy work for us. I'm wondering if there's any. I constantly rack my brain to see like, well, where can we apply, some of our thought processes and our skills here to the current gap in the system. But unfortunately, it's a little more complicated than that, to your point. So.
See, but I wish, and here's a business idea. I wish that there was a company that could, like, what corporate social responsibility is? Like, when a corporation's like, okay, this is what we do for the people. This is how we're benefiting your society. I wish that there was a group of people who could go into a business and enhance a business's corporate social structure. Like, even to the point where, like, Twitter was like, oh, I just thought it was interesting when they were like, nobody has to come into work anymore. And somebody posted, this is huge for Twitter workers in the Bay Area because it's super expensive to live in the Bay Area. So once they move out of there, their quality of life will skyrocket if they were if they had to live in a studio apartment, but now they can work remote in North Carolina. Right. They're going to be getting paid such a abnormally high paycheck in that location. So it's like, isn't that better for everybody? The person is a more quality worker because they have more expendable income. They're probably happier. They can work where they want to work. And being able to monitor that and measure that might be a valuable resource for a company. Like, are people less productive if they work from home? Could we run some trial periods, have a company track that data, and then report on it and be like, you're actually just as productive or more productive when your workers work from home? Or in some cases, yeah, you should have everybody come into the office. But it's just seeming that, like, things need to change. There's just no proponent of change. Nobody's seen it or done it, and I think that maybe the next phase of even young professionals is like digitizing the new world, to be able to do work remote, to conference like this remote, having it become comfortable and the norm, even in like education systems and stuff.
For sure. Well, I mean, in fairness, that is technically in most situations what a human resources department is for. But I agree, to expand on that is important. Change is certainly needed. Kind of using that as a segue to move on to our next topic, in terms of change, in terms of what's going on in this country. Obviously, everything's getting a little crazy. We had the Ahmaud Arbery situation a few weeks ago. We just had this George Floyd tragedy happen this week. My question to you is, and I asked this question, as many people who are listening might know, Adam and I are Jewish. We have, we're proud cultural Jews. We've taken our history as a people very seriously. Adam, you're dating a proud black woman in Trudy, and probably have to deal with a lot of things that that other couples don't have to deal with. So my question to you is, with all of this going on, when you consider the actual incidences And then the bigger picture, where should the dialogue on race be focused in this country right now, in your opinion?
That is like the most complicated question of all time.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we
Save
wanted
that
to ask
one for
you.
you. Ben saved that one for you, Adam. You knew you could handle
your
it.
thoughts, Adam.
Yeah, exactly.
The floor is yours. You can say anything you'd like.
Yeah, yeah.
This is the thing, is that, like, I think there's a lot of opportunities right now for us to listen, just as a human race. Like, we had talked about this in our own family setting, and the debate was more like, does anybody deserve to die for going and checking out a property? You know what I mean? Like, it's, in my opinion, Georgia. So, Georgia's history with all of that doesn't seem to be the most humanitarian. So I think there's some bias there that maybe could have played into this event. I think that it was completely unnecessary in terms of that event. Even in Minneapolis, it's like, I saw a picture of the Chinese police doing the same thing in China, and somebody posted, "Don't forget there's police brutality everywhere." And I thought that was interesting, because it's like, what you really have is an authority against the people. That's the oppressor. And I think oftentimes we all have thought that oppressor is someone, like, for Jews, it was the Nazis. Right now, for the Chinese public, it's the Chinese government. I always refer back to 1984 by George Orwell, because it calls the general masses the Sproles.
Yeah.
So it's all of us, and I think that that's interesting, because it does feel like society is layered. Like, it's like, do I apply for unemployment? Is it wrong for me to apply for unemployment? I am taking away from the, United States' economy, and all the questions you ask yourself while Donald Trump spends over $100 million on golf in his presidency. And it's not just Donald Trump. There's massive spending going on by the government officials everywhere. That's so beyond anything that we could ever fathom. So then it goes into where it's like, who's the enemy? Who's oppressing you? Who is teaching these authoritative forces like the police force to do those things, or allowing the public to feel okay? That's the one argument that when people talk about Trump, and, we can have this whole debate, but it's like, there is sort of the feeling, or it seems that in the past few years, there's been more of a feeling of like, well, it's okay to do stuff like that. Or, it's like the racial conversation has begun to become more aggressive than maybe under Obama's presidency. And I think that's kind of like spurring a lot of emotions. And I think the police get caught in the middle of that a lot. They become the enemy of a lot of people, which doesn't help them, but it also doesn't help the people. There's really no police for the police. If the police are doing unjust things and just going around and kneeling on people's throats, who can go over to a police officer and say, get off that guy? Like, you're killing him. You're literally killing him. Right. So I don't know if that's like, you give EMT workers more rights and more power to disengage a situation if they think a police officer is hurting somebody. It's one of those things where it's like, a cop is going to respond to an event, and if he feels threatened, that's a human feeling threatened. How do you react in the same situation? Ahmaud Arbery feels threatened. So you can't say, oh, well, he should talk politely to somebody and tell him to calm down. If two people got out of a truck with guns and pointed them at me and asked me why I was on somebody's property, I would freak out too. I wouldn't just be like, hey, let's all relax here. So it's like, I've been having this conversation a lot, and I've thought about like what, weirdly enough, what I believe in is, and this isn't the right answer, I believe that, like, in the truest form of justice, right? And I got this from Plato's Republic, it's to mind your own business. Ayn Rand talks about minding your own business. Conservative values is to mind your own business. However, how do you react when there's a group of violent people not minding their own business and becoming involved in your life and shaping your life? And I think that's what this country was built on, is kind of white values and a white agenda. It's the white people hold the property, the chair in offices where they can make those decisions. They can perpetuate an economy, a system, and everything that benefits white individuals. And it's been created like that and sustained like that, in my opinion. And you can look at like Katrina, things that happened like that would point towards this. You can look at police brutality, how things aren't figured out. You can look at how long it took for anybody to get arrested in Georgia after that incident happened. You can look like down the line of things that just prove to the people that it's like, okay, there's this obvious thing in our country that isn't equal. The way to fix that, or the way to address it, to me, that's the big question. No one can answer.
Right. If it was an easy answer, I think it would obviously be on its way to being fixed. And Nick, I do want to get your opinion on this, because my feeling is, and I think we have a similar feeling on this, is that there does need to be some deep reflection in terms of finding the source and addressing that, rather than trying to apply race to everything. And what I mean by that is, everyone's talking about the George Floyd situation, and people are bringing up how, again, black people are disproportionately killed by police officers. But then, the easy argument to that is, if you do your research, according to FBI crime statistics and the Department of Justice, a logical explanation of that is, even though the black community represents 13% of the population, they also commit 50% of the crime. So obviously, if a police officer has that many more encounters with a black individual, it's going
that's an interesting thing, though. Sorry to cut you off, but even if they only account for 13% of the population, but it's like, if you even take into account what I said about, think about the trajectory in the history. If there's families stuck in inner city Harlem and every generation of them has struggled.
Well, that's what I was going to move on to in terms of looking at the deeper source, is that, okay, so, but again, so that addresses the police brutality aspect of this. And I've done plenty of research where, honestly, in black communities, black community leaders will say in a lot of situations that actually more policing of the community is what's needed to turn that community around. My overall point is that even if you can point to it and say, okay, well, there's a socioeconomic reason for black people committing crime, because black people have a much higher chance of being poor due to the racism of the past, 10 decades. That's the reason for it. I understand that's a conversation that needs to be had. But my point is it important to actually find the source rather than trying to apply race to everything, even though, again, as awful as this George Floyd situation was, is there really any evidence that the motivation behind it was a white supremacist cop getting his chance to kill a black individual? Because I don't read it that way, even though that is usually the media narrative.
Well, I mean, I agree. So I agree with Adam in the sense that, Adam, you brought up a really good point that I wanted to touch on. And you talked about like policing the police, right? Like where is the intervention on the police? And I've always felt strongly that and I'm sure you guys could speak to this too. Sometimes, I mean, all of us, each one of us, we know, police officers, lieutenants, things like that in our personal life. We know people who are in the profession, right?
A lot of great people.
And there's some of those folks where you look at them and you're like, okay, this so-and-so was a former, Marine. This is somebody who is highly trained, highly skilled in hand-to-hand combat, very confident of themselves in a sort of difficult situation where a lot of these situations are happening, and you're looking at the individuals that are causing these things. Like, and I think the Ahmaud Arbery thing and the George Floyd thing are two different situations. First of all, the George Floyd thing, I think, was a situation where George Floyd was a larger dude. I mean, let's face it, this guy was a high school tight end, apparently a standout high school athlete in football. He was a bouncer at a club, right? But I mean, he wasn't an unfriendly guy by all accounts. And I look at that and I think, like, this was just a case where the police were intimidated. right? Like they went into this situation and they were intimidated, so they overreacted, which is what folks tend to do in an intimidating situation where they feel intimidated. And that comes down to proper training, right? I mean, how many times do you see a cop and you think, yeah, if I wanted to commit a crime right now, I would take off and there's no shot that guy's catching me. I mean, the thoughts cross your mind, you know, like, I mean, but seriously though, I mean, I think when you, to Adam's point, policing the police, I think that that's a huge, I think that that's a serious thing, right? Yeah. Because I don't think that we do an adequate job of screening police officers, albeit, you know, I know a police officer who I actually play soccer with down here, and he's been a police officer in the Raleigh-Durham area for a really long time, you know, military background, the whole 9 yards. But he said, look, like, people just don't want to become cops. That's what it comes down to. I mean, there's like a talent shortage, basically. There's a gap in skill because people just don't want to do it. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that the vetting process should be any more lax. I mean, these are...
Or even disciplinary. Like, right. To me, it's like we're all people. And that argument always gets brought up. It's like, well, they're people. It's like, okay, but they're people who are given guns and tasers. So, right. Like, the difference between that person and me becomes that they're armed and I'm not. And on top of that, like, the reason why, like, those statistics to me that you brought up are just so, like, there are families that have never gotten that shot, that yeah. Lucky break, that opportunity. And it's like, you can't even look around the place where we grew up and not find heroin everywhere. Even kids who had great childhoods, who just right. came up great, they get into heroin or they get into something. And like an interesting thing for me being in construction is you find out about things like Newark, New Jersey was covered in lead paint. It had so much lead paint there that the reason why Newark is one of the meanest cities in the country and has one of the highest crime rates is all of those children who grew up there eating lead paint became aggressive and sort of, you know, not the brightest bulb in the tree. Right. And the thing that sucks for them is that is a socioeconomic issue that would lead them to having more interactions with police. And if you're people who need to live in those cheap housing that's still covered in lead paint because you don't have any nice place to live or a place that had lead paint removal done to it or anything like that, then you have families and generations like sharing these living quarters. And that's something that, like, it's interesting. And that's why the Sproles thing that I was talking about is that here in the United States, that is a race issue, in my opinion. Like, it is still a white issue, and it affects every race. But the way this country specifically was built and how everything happened, it was related to race. Why it's not equal today. The question that is curious to me is, like, moving forward, because that's what I think the goal is to move forward. Can you eradicate idiot cops? Or us trying something like lead paint and it failing? Can you eradicate racism? Can you eradicate hatred and evil? Or do you have to be the opposing force to that? Like Alan Watts talks about how everything's one organism. You couldn't have a flower without a bee because a bee has to pollinate a flower or the flower couldn't exist, and vice versa.
Right.
So the yin and the yang. Without good, there can't be evil. Without sadness, there can't be happiness, because you wouldn't know the difference between them. So in society, I look at that, and it's like, some people come up to me, and it's like, well, how can we get everyone to stop being racist? And it's an interesting question, because it's like, well, you can't. Right. There's always going to be somebody who gets slapped in the face the wrong way, and mouths off the wrong way, and bam, he became a racist because he was trying to offend somebody in the worst way. And do you try to change that? Or do you try to change the system at hand that is meant to delegate all of these, you know, the police brutality thing, like policing the police? Maybe there needs to be a force of all black individuals to look over these cases, like seriously, in court and be like, this is what we found to be a hate crime, and then run it against the Supreme Court. I know that this is just off the top of my head. Right, maybe it's a stupid idea. I just mean that there needs to be an opposing force, a force of good, to monitor the force of bad, because the government is innately bad. They get greedy and they want to be too authoritative, and they'll just suck all your money away and live like fat cats. That's a human nature thing. They're greedy. Greed will not cease to exist from society. I don't think gluttony will, any of that stuff. So to me, you just need to invent and apply, not like the UN. The UN's all bullshit. It pisses me off. The UN is such a facade of bullshit. I mean, like, actual entities that can stand up and make real changes, like embargoes or boycotts to countries like China, create real changes like monitor police forces and get immediate action when something, you know, is wrong, and like that would create a whole industry, a whole new job outlook for people who maybe want to make a difference in the world. So to me, it's like you can't start from the, you know, there's racist people, how do we stop them from being racist? To me, it's like there's racist people. What could we do to aid the people who are victims of racism and try to give, because what is freedom? Can people not be racist? I know this sounds awful. Do people have the freedom to hate? If you have the freedom to hate, unfortunately, that means that people are allowed to take those freedoms, but they're not allowed to act on them, and there needs to be some opposing force constantly monitoring that and attacking anytime they see an attack. So,
well,
what force would that be?
And we've talked about this too, because, I mean, we're talking about almost two separate things that are, I mean, completely intertwined. But I've always been, I can't say always, but I'd say over the last several years, I've always been a very strong advocate for reparation payments due to slavery. I mean, you talk about the Treasury Department. I know we've talked about, you know, money being printed off the gold standard, right, and how that's not a thing anymore. But the Treasury Department, the Treasury building itself sits in the nation's capital and was not put together, I mean, or was put together brick by unpaid forced labor. You know what I mean? So that in and of itself is a tale of why I think reparations should be made, especially to those communities who have just been beaten up over time, to your point. And it is interconnected, I think, with some of the police brutality and the points that you brought up. But this is a topic where I think the three of us could easily have our own show on. It's deep, and we, admittedly, the three of us are white. And I mean, it's just one of those things where, unfortunately, we're not going to solve it, but we can be actors of change by having these conversations, I think, because listen,
be the opposing force, the opposing force to the evil. And if that's all you can do, like if somebody that's just always, in my opinion, the best thing you could do. If somebody comes up to you and they're genuinely upset about something, if you say like, what could I do? Yeah. That's a way better approach than like, no. Yeah. Or like, I don't think so. Because if they can't tell you something to do or an actionable step, at least they were heard. And if you listen to them and they don't have any actionable steps, then it's like, maybe that's the place to start. What could we do? Because in my opinion, shouldn't we, like, I think there needs to be a lot of admitting done. Like, as you said, the Treasury building, I think a lot of people don't think like that. A lot of people think much differently than that. That we're lucky to be in this nation. All of us are lucky to be in this nation. And that's something that, like, as we've gotten older and our parents' generation, you know, we always say that the last generation, like, they did have a great economy. And the 1970s seemed like a pretty kumbaya time to live through. And I think that, like, maybe they were onto something with universal love and togetherness and stuff like that. And it seems like there needs to be a revolution like that again, as opposed to, like, it's scary because the only other revolution you can have is violent. So we're either going to figure this out by having a revolution of coming together or a revolution of parting ways. And that's,
And we'll Ben, see. I know we need to move on, but all I could think of when I was watching this George Floyd video, just really quick, I'd be curious really quick maybe to get both of your thoughts on this before we move on. I was watching that George Floyd video, and all I could think of was, in that situation, I'm watching these people as bystanders who are, you know, they're yelling back at the officer and all the officers who are there, like, just monitoring the situation. I have a hard time in those situations. Like, if I were to walk by a bar and I see somebody being stomped out by a group of people, I want to intervene. Like, I don't want to see that happen to somebody who's being, and that includes the police. If that were a friend of mine or somebody where I felt like their life was in jeopardy, I would have probably had to be restrained by the police we're trying to get that officer off of that individual, especially if it was a friend or somebody I was associated with. I mean, I would gladly take a charge in that situation if I knew that it was going to save someone's life.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Or if I even hinted, or if I even suspected it would save somebody's life. I mean, that's just my personal take.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree for sure. And you know, it's tough because, you know, there's the aspect of, you know, as I mentioned this on Facebook earlier, you know, as many videos as there are of you know, police brutality and police officers, you know, doing something inexcusable. There's just as many videos online, if you look, of a police officer getting shot in the face during a routine traffic stop for a broken taillight. I mean, so in terms of, you know, again, it goes back to these individuals are scared, they're intimidated. It's not a reason for them to overreact,
Right.
but it obviously is a human reaction, and you know, I would agree in those situations where it's very obvious that a person's life is in danger. Yeah, I probably would have to intervene, and you never really know until you're in that situation.
Right.
Whether
Right,
you
of
would or
course.
not, but I agree with you. I mean, it is certainly, you know, while I want to be empathetic of both sides, there are just some things that you can't let go or justify, and you know, a situation like that is one of them.
Yeah, that's why I just like the body cam thing. I really liked it.
Yep.
Just in terms of like holding people accountable to what went on while it went on. I just think there needs to be. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of like Serpico, Frank Serpico or whatever. There was a movie that Al Pacino made, or I believe it was Al Pacino. But there was basically a cop in the 1970s. It's a true story who was in the NYPD and was like, "This is super corrupt. You guys can't be doing all this stuff," and tried to make changes. And he got brought to a domestic call, and the guy opened the door and shot him in the head. And the two officers that were there with him waited like 16 minutes or something to call for backup before they did, and he ended up living through getting shot in the face or whatever. So he was able to like tell his story and be like, yeah, they tried to let me die. Like they wanted me gone from trying to make these differences. So I think it's difficult to come from inside. You can't have a police officer who's there to monitor the other cops. It would need to be an equivalent legal force that could monitor the cops as they do their work, so that it isn't just this free-for-all. It'd be the same thing. You'd hope that the system of checks and balances actually worked in the United States government, so that we could check people's power and actually, you know, have a government the way it was supposed to be run. But yeah, again, we could go on for hours about that. But
we do want to move on to sports.
Lighter topic. Perfect
lighter
transition.
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, so I know we talked about, you know, sports opening back up, and we're all three of us are big sports fans. I already gave you guys my take on what I think sports is going to look like, but I'd be curious, Adam, you know, what's your take on, do you see that these sports seasons, like the NFL season, the MLB season, you know, these sort of professional sports, at least in America, are going to start kicking off without fans? Like, what do you think that's going to look like?
That's the thing, is there's so many sports. I'm surprised things like tennis haven't gotten more popular right now. Like, you could probably have a tennis match with just a camera guy, the two tennis athletes, and the guy in the middle, and a couple ball people, and be like, okay, no one's going to get too messed up. That's the tricky part with, like, football or contact sports, with, like, how much bodily fluids are being shared or how many cuts might happen where there's the opportunity for that. The thing is, though, it's like the only question that needs to be answered is, are we going to let it rip or not? Like,
right.
Are we going to let everyone get corona, or like just be like, okay, it has to happen? Or because that's the question I've been asking myself. It's like, quarantining made sense to give hospitals time to get ready if there was going to be a surge. Past that, it doesn't make much sense to stay quarantined, because if the virus still exists, all we should really be waiting for is a way to treat it successfully, not try to avoid getting it entirely. Because I don't think, and that's why with athletes, the other weird thing is that their lives are worth, their physical health is worth millions and millions of dollars. So some of these guys might just view that as like, if I get sick and it messes with my kidneys, like Snell said, Tony Snell or whatever, he's like, my body's an asset, so I can't be, given the money back if it messes with my internal organs or I get really sick and I have to miss time and it like messes with me with my rehab and all of that stuff. So they think about it a little differently than we do, because as a fan, it's like, yeah, just go back. If you get coronavirus, you'll have to take time off, but the virus is always going to be there. And yeah, as an athlete, it might be more up to them than we think.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, and I'm gonna bring race back into this conversation. I mean, inadvertently, but because I follow the English Premier League, to your point, Adam, about athletes keeping healthy, some of the English Premier League, which is the most lucrative soccer league in the world, most lucrative hands down, it's like not really even close. There's a few athletes. Troy Deeney for Watford, he's a striker, very well known guy, and he said, look, like, this virus hits harder disproportionately for African American or for folks who are black. It disproportionately, the contraction rates and the long term effects are really like disproportionately more prevalent in people who are black. Well, why should I risk this as a black man playing in this game? Why should I have more risk than somebody else just because people want the marketing dollars or the TV money? Like, why should I be risking my health, right? I mean, it's an interesting take on, like, the athletes, because you don't think about the athletes. We think about the entertainment, right? We're not thinking about the athletes.
But keep in mind, I mean, so to your point about that, I mean, and as far as what I've seen, I mean, that has less to do with genetics and more to do with, people of color generally living in more in more population dense areas.
Well, that's not necessarily the case for these guys. I mean, they were talking professional athletes. These guys are the cream of the crop.
But all I'm saying is that he was speaking to that generally, right? I mean, he wasn't saying. So
he was saying for himself. He was worried about his own health. He was saying, like, why should I go to team training where I'm far more likely, statistically, I'm far more likely to contract something more serious than maybe this guy who I play with from Sweden.
Right. No, I understand that. All I'm saying is that the statistics that he's using are based on the fact that when you look at the African American community, the reason why they're contracting it so much more often, having more complications, is because they're in poor neighborhoods, they're in more population dense areas where the viral load is higher. Just as far as what I'm seeing. As far as sports go, and I mean that's what I was talking about when I was talking about an athlete's livelihood. It's easy for us as fans to say just go back and just go back to work.
Shut up and dribble.
Right. Right, exactly. And in terms of opening everything back up, like I said, I mean, CDC right now, 0.26% mortality rate, which means very, 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 very low chance of dying from this disease. But that doesn't mean that an athlete that needs to be in top condition doesn't develop some type of complication or some type of deficiency from getting this virus. So it is definitely something to consider when we're just telling athletes that they should go back to work for our entertainment.
Plus, it's not just the athletes, as much as the professional athletes, because once they open up sports professionally, they're going to open up sports in general, I think. Right. So I think that like half of the conversation is also like, are we leading everybody into believing? I think it's more financial than anything, whether or not to bring it back. But I just think that obviously at the high school level and stuff like that, I talked to one mother and she was like, oh, my son didn't get to play senior year baseball this year. And I was like, wow, that's so devastating. Yeah, I didn't even think of that. Seniors will never get to be the varsity seniors of that year. They'll just never. So it's like.
That's a good point.
Some of that even affects kids who might want to play in college, and this is when they you normally would be getting looked at by scouts and all that. So we're putting a significant thing on hold, and that's why it's more at what point do you call it if the CDC is right and this is a 0.26% mortality, whatever, then do we risk it? And are those 0.26% because I just had a friend whose father passed away from coronavirus, and I'm speaking about this as somebody who's had no one close to me pass away. So maybe if somebody, directly related to me I would think of it completely like, what are you, crazy? No, you can't start sports right now. Like, that's insane. While other people, because these athletes go home to kids and parents and everything like that. So it's not like they can be quarantined for 3 months while they play. Although I have heard the tournament style, like they wanted to have everybody stay in a hotel and do one big 20-team tournament.
Yeah.
Just for a financial kick, and be like, okay, let's try to recoup some finances. At least we'll have a, I'd be down with something like that.
World and play a basketball tournament.
Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
So really quick, Adam, I want to know, and I want you to chime in on this too. My take is NFL season starts on time. Adam, yes or no?
Yes.
Ben, thoughts?
Yeah, I do think the NFL season starts on time. I think we're going to make a lot of progress with this virus in terms of what we know about it this summer. It's already kind of been proven that we have a lot more safety in movement with the warmer weather. And it's why it's not affecting southern states quite as much as far as hospitalizations and stuff like that, because apparently sunlight and warm weather not only kills the virus, but also helps keep you from getting it. Yeah. I do think we're going to learn a lot more over the next couple of months. And, football in August, September, I don't see why that isn't possible.
It'd be great if we could get the light inside of us.
Yeah. Maybe through injection or
something. Just a thought. Yeah.
Adam, going to the NFL, we have a couple of topics real quick before we hit our rapid fire segment. Number one, I think a lot of people listening to this, because they know you're on the show, obviously you're a New England fan, but you're also a fan of a specific team, and I think a lot of people know why. So, why the Browns? If you can just explain that to our viewers and a lot of your friends watching who might not have the explanation.
So for years and years and years, the Browns have been the absolute laughingstock of the NFL, and we were so blessed in our couple decades of being New England fans that I figured I should give the Browns one more fan because the Patriots could use one less.
Wow.
And I hate Tom Brady, and I've always hated Tom Brady.
Wow.
Quick segue.
Wow. Wait a second. Can I jump in on this?
Yeah.
So Adam, I need all right, try to keep the explanation, because you and I could have our own separate segment about this, literally.
Yeah.
Give me like a 2 to 3 minute rundown as to why you hate Tom Brady. It can be personal. It can be his ability.
I can go on forever about why I hate him.
Okay.
Like, there's some athletes, like Andrew Luck, when he gets popped, it's like, hey, great hit. Oh man, that was really, a great hit. Or if his line isn't playing, it's like, let's go. Like, let's spin this. Tom Brady is just that kid that screams at you and is negative unless you play out of your mind. He's such a toxic, and this is the thing that used to get me. People would be like, who's Tom Brady? It used to be Peyton Manning or Tom Brady. So it was like, well, Peyton Manning's had Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne and Brandon Stokely and all these people. Who's Tom Brady had? And it was like Gronkowski, Hernandez, Wes Welker, Randy Moss, Deion Branch, like Kevin Falk. There's so many people that he's had. Richard Seymour on defense. Just endless. Oh God, yeah, Chad Ochocinco for a random year.
Yeah,
like
Brandon Cooks.
That's what I'm saying. He's had, and then the kicking was so good. for so long, which people like completely overlook, and the coaching.
That
so you
Adam
have like
Terry won him 3 Super Bowls.
yeah, completely, like it was a blizzard, and we were
Pete
like,
Carroll,
that's it.
Pete Carroll won him a Super Bowl. Pete
Yeah.
Carroll won him a
Yeah.
Super Bowl as
Yeah.
well. You know, I mean, Pete Carroll got him a Super Bowl.
And it's like, what was it, Tom? Was it all Tom Brady who won all those games? And it's like, no, it's like such a team game to do all the things that he did. He had to sit on the sideline and watch as Malcolm Butler intercepted that pass. He had to sit there and watch as Adam Vinatieri hit that kick. So I've always thought that the quarterback gets way too much attention. And then it's like Uggs, boots. You're the most famous athlete in the world, and you want to market Uggs.
Yeah.
Boots.
Yeah. Well, my thing is,
I mean, that kind of coincides with him French kissing his son. I mean,
that is true. That is true. But I would say, which is one of the most uncomfortable things I've ever seen in my life. And I would also say, like, people talk about like what an outstanding. I hear this all the time from people, like, oh, you know, I want my kids to look at Tom Brady as a role model and these sort of things. Tom Brady. Now let's talk about Tom Brady as a person, right? This is somebody who's lied under oath, who literally lied to federal investigators, right? Somebody who literally left a pregnant supermodel to go be with a different supermodel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, this is the character of the individual that we're talking about here. But character point aside, I've always been, and Ben knows this, I think you know this, I've always taken the track that not only do I think Tom Brady is like the most overrated quarterback ever, I think he's the most overrated athlete ever, because nobody would get the title of being the greatest ever in their sport with all of the red flags that Tom Brady has.
Definitely. I hate everything about this man. Even to the fact that, my gosh. Like,
we'll have to do a special.
Because then like you always had to hear like, oh, isn't it so nice that Tom Brady took a pay cut? It's like, yeah, so Gronk would always be on that team. So Edelman would always be on that team. And his wife is worth more than him, so it's a lot easier to be like.
Everyone who talks about the Tom Brady pay cuts, not every NFL quarterback has a sugar mama either who makes more.
Like $300 million or worth something like that. So then it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, isn't it noble that millionaire wasn't such a millionaire this year? It's like, no, I don't really care about things like that. What I do care about is that when like we're 11-3 last season, he's excited for the team and he wants to work with the rookies. And it's like, even the fact that there's any question that if it was Bill Belichick or not, like, look how we beat the Rams. Yeah, we didn't even score. We were just like, okay, we'll just have the nastiest defense on earth this year, because that's what we're going to need to do to win. And that's what Bill Belichick has always done.
Yeah, and Brady's playoff numbers for that last Super Bowl against the Rams, let's not forget. I mean, the run game won them that Super Bowl, and the defense won them that Super Bowl. Yeah. But let's not forget, you know, Tom Brady had 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions throughout those playoffs. So, I mean, to your point, it's almost like when he won the MVP against the Rams, when he threw for 164 yards. I mean, that's an embarrassment, right? Yeah. For an MVP to win. Or when James White didn't win the MVP against Atlanta, and he broke 5 individual playoff records. Yeah. I don't understand it. You know what I mean? I don't get it.
It's always all Tom. I hate Tom.
Yeah. All right. Good. Well, Adam, you're so far my favorite guest. Sorry, Dan. But Ben, I'll let you jump into the next one, because we got about 10 minutes or so.
Yeah. Moving on to the rapid fire round. Bunch of questions, just off the top of your head. What are the answers? We will start with what I think is going to be one of our recurring questions, just for the time being, because I think a lot of people are going to have different answers. Maybe not. We're going to find out over the next few episodes. Adam, what is the best band of all time?
Led Zeppelin.
Wow, Benny, went with your take.
I had the same answer. Yeah. Nick thinks it's the Beatles. You want to just give us a rundown of why?
Wait a second. Wait a second. I don't think it's the Beatles. I know it's the Beatles.
Dude, Led Zeppelin was, if the Beatles all grew beards and balls, that would be Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, well, I mean, and if Zeppelin sold 6 times as many albums, but it is what it is, you know? All right, so next one, and this one's interesting because actually the rapid fire round here, Ben, you contributed a lot of these questions this week because obviously, you and Adam are siblings, so you know him very well.
Right.
But this one I'm interested by, and I might have a bone to pick here. So Jimmy Page or Jimi Hendrix?
As a great guitar player yourself, that's why I wanted to ask.
I'd say Jimmy Page, only because of volume. Jimi Hendrix died so young. Like it's Jimi Hendrix was insane though. Yeah. Like he learned to play guitar with his teeth because people in the South were so mean racist, that when he'd play, they just chuck bottles at him unless he did crazy stuff. It's like stuff like that. He played a lefty guitar or a righty guitar. I think he played a righty guitar upside down instead of playing a lefty guitar. I don't know. He was just like so beyond his time. But Jimmy Page he's too nasty.
Do you think Jimmy Page is the GOAT? Do you think Jimmy Page is the greatest guitarist of all time? Is that what that question was pertaining to?
Sort of. I mean, I just thought, Jimmy versus Jimmy. I almost knew his answer was going to be Led Zeppelin. But there are a lot of great guitarists. Who do you think is the greatest guitarist of all time in your opinion, Adam?
So I agree. I want to hear Adam. I'm going to yeah.
And then
that's the hardest thing. It's like the best guitarist of all time.
First name that comes to your head. First name that comes to your head. You can't.
Jimmy Page. Yeah, Jimmy Page.
Wow, Jimmy Page. So here's why I'm going to tell you you're wrong. Because I am a believer. So first of all, I think Jimi Hendrix gets a lot of credit. He was exceptional. I think he's widely regarded as the best ever. But I think he gets a lot of that credit because he died so young. My take is Eric Clapton, because he was in he nominated in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 3 times, the only person to ever do it. He also got Jimmy Page. He got Jimmy Page his first gig after Eric Clapton left, what was it, the Yardbirds, right? Eric Clapton said, hey, this kid sounds pretty good. You guys might want to get him as my replacement. So, I don't know, man. Eric Clapton
was like, damn.
Listen,
you guys want a good guitarist. I know a guy.
I don't know, man. Eric Clapton to me is the guy, but I guess I respect that. Jimmy
Clapton
Page
would be up there, and I mean, there's all kinds of different answers for people, for music aficionados. Some people would say Santana, some people would say Eddie Van Halen. I mean, there are a lot of different.
Stevie Ray Vaughan's really good.
Yeah, Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Johnny Winter's really good.
Chuck Berry.
Yeah, it's just so many.
Moving on. Scotch or tequila?
Scotch.
Ooh. Wait, it's the first thing he said, though. He has to stay with it if it's the first thing he said.
Give a caveat to that?
Yeah, I'll stick with Scotch.
What kind of Scotch?
Johnny Walker Black Label.
Woo!
Specifically.
A man after my own heart.
Yeah, all right. I'll take Chivas too, but Johnny Walker Black Label.
All right, so this next one, I think I might already know the answer. Most hated team of all time. The team you hate the most.
Oh, man. That's so tough because I hate a lot of teams, but I hate the Giants. I hate the Giants.
Okay, wait, San Francisco or New York?
New York. Oh, New York.
I just want to make sure for the viewers.
Yeah. Oh, man. When Eli beat us twice, I remember, because I still feel it sometimes, the pure rage that I was like, Eli. This is another reason why I hate Tom. It'd be like having a friend who's wicked jacked, and he's just constantly working out and beating the crap out of people, constantly. And you're just like, yeah, this guy's the man. Like, he just always whoops people's asses so hard. It's so fun to be around him. And then they're like, hey, well, do you think you could beat up Alan? And Alan's like, guys, my name's Alan, and I like pineapples. And then you're like, yeah, obviously he could beat up Alan. Alan's like the worst. He barely even made it to school this morning. And then they fight, and Alan beats the crap out of whatever this huge idiot's name is. And then a couple of years later, he comes back, and he's like, oh, rematch. This dude's been lifting nonstop. He's so strong now. He's accomplished so much more. He's so much smarter and more agile. And Alan's like, I still love pineapples. And then he gets his ass kicked again by Alan.
Oh my god! So Eli's Alan. I love the analogy. Most hated athlete.
I really hate Ryan Tannehill.
More than Tom Brady, okay.
But Tom Brady. But I really hate Ryan Tannehill. You want to talk about a guy who gets a lot of hype in Miami, and then the Titans, he goes to the Titans last year, and they're like, let's do it. Let's sign him to a long-year contract. Yeah, he did awesome after the Miami thing. It's like, that team will perpetually be mediocre, and every team who trusts Ryan Tannehill will be perpetually mediocre for the rest of their lives. That's how I feel about him.
Next question. Obviously, you're a gamer. I'm a gamer. We're both gamers. I happen to know what your favorite game is. Just so that you actually have to process this in your head, even though I think I know what the answer is going to be. If you had to lose one forever, which would it be? Fantasy football or playing Dota?
Oh, I'd lose playing Dota. Nothing will ever be as fun as fantasy football. Ever. It's more just the social aspect of fantasy football, you know? Like when I won 2 championships in 2 leagues last year, you know? And you can just walk around with your friends.
Shameless plug.
And I didn't draft a single person the same. So these are 2 entirely different teams that each won the championship. And I started 0-3 and won the championship in 1 league. Nothing like that. Nothing. And then I said, do you want to split the winnings to the guy in 1 league? And he goes, no. And I was like, all right. And then I beat him. It's like, you could have had more money, but you got cocky.
Yeah.
He was no Allen.
Oh, he was no Allen.
He was no Allen.
I was the Allen in that situation, like in pineapples.
Nick, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, I'll take the next one. So, favorite state you visited, and I know you mentioned you've been to over 40. So, what's your favorite state? And this could be your next home.
I'd say my favorite state was Colorado. Like, most beautiful, Hawaii or Montana, but Colorado was like the friendliest with the most awe-inspiring nature, but had the most like variables in land. You know, if you wanted to be in the desert, you could be in the mountains, you could be by a really big body of water, you could be. And everybody was super nice.
All the pot.
Cities. And all the pot. The amount of pot that was there was just ridiculous.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I was trying to give you a hint. Like, you should definitely go to Colorado for all the nature that's there.
Yeah, try the brownies. Try the brownies.
Make sure to eat everything they offer you. They're all super nice, and no one is ever in a bad mood in Colorado.
Speaking of food, a lot of people don't know you're a pescatarian, which means you don't eat meat. You basically eat everything else. If somebody came to you and put a gun to your head and said, you have to give up being pescatarian for a day, what would be the 3 meals that you would eat that day?
Oh, 3 cheat meals.
Chicken wings, fried, like double fried chicken wings with 10. It'd be 30 of them. 10 honey mustard, 10 normal, just like crispy wings, and then 10 buffalo. My mouth's watering. Then I would have Chinese food with like the teriyaki on the stick, pork egg rolls, bone-on pork spare ribs, pork fried rice. I just eat all my pork in that meal.
Sure.
And I definitely. Oh man, I couldn't eat chicken twice. I was gonna say definitely eat fried chicken, but I just had 30 wings. So I guess. I'd probably have like a meat lover's pizza with like pepperoni, like just all the meat I could think of, because I've been really craving like, no, a steak and cheese, dude. I miss steak and cheeses. So I can't even believe I temporarily forgot about how much I miss steak and cheeses. So yeah,
cool.
Steak and cheese.
Nick, you want to take the last one?
So you're a man who's had many professions. You've gone through many sort of professional experiences so far, and you plan to do many more. But what is, final question for the wrap around here, what is your dream job? What's the dream job for Adam in your head? If you could make it up. It doesn't have to be a real thing.
I would start a retreat that is a music studio that bands could come to record albums when they want to get away from everything. Like they just want to be in the middle of nowhere in this wicked cool spot, and or artists. So I would just have a huge like jam space / artist studio that people could utilize, and then I would cook for them whatever they wanted. They'd just, send me a menu before, and I would spend my days cooking, and I would have a big greenhouse, so all the vegetables and everything was super fresh. And I'd have a guy that went to South America and picked up like peyote, acid, mushrooms, pot, and quaaludes for when people got there, and I could just be like, "Oh, anything you want, I have anything."
Yeah. And then it doesn't.
Dream job.
And then it wouldn't matter how good you cook.
Yeah, I could make popcorn, and it'd be like, "This is fantastic, man!
Yeah,
I'm so inspired by this." I'd be like, "Yeah,
that's perfect.
Did you know there's a button on the microwave that just all you gotta do is press that and it burns it?"
Oh man.
Yeah.
So, Adam, this has been really great having you on. We really appreciate you taking the time. We've laughed a lot. I will say back to Ben and I, for the folks listening, you want to come on the show, Adam set a high bar here. Adam and Dan both have set a pretty high bar. So you want to come on the show, get some laughs in, get through a rapid fire round, cover some of these topics, please reach out to one of us. We're happy to have you on. We don't care what your opinions are really on anything. We're not here to bash you or anything. I think, Adam, you can attest that this was a pretty fun time.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yep.
I think that you guys should market it that you should bring a drink, though, because Dan brought a drink, and I didn't. He was drinking a beer.
That's a good point. Yeah, he did start it with a beer.
And I was like, oh. I watched it right before you guys invited me, and then I was like, what the hell?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. So yeah, that's the other thing. For the next guest, if you want to bring a drink,
bring a beverage.
Bring a drink. We should have brought Johnny Walker for this occasion with Adam, but maybe next time. Until next time, Ben, you'll have this posted when?
Yeah, it'll be posted by tomorrow night, as usual, Thursday. Adam, anything before we go? Anything you want to plug before we let you go? Anything you're working on? Any Instagrams that you're affiliated with or anything like that you want people to take a look at before we let you go? It's an opportunity here for
Ben
our
said,
for
Ben
our
said Ben said Instagrams like a real boomer. Instagrams.
You got any of the MySpace people that you want to share on the line?
If you have any one of those social medias you want to share, let us know.
Right now, I'm not involved in any cool projects at all. Yeah, I'm just working on stuff right now. But Cushy Tings, that's my girlfriend Trudy's Instagram page is all filled with wonderful content. She has an herbalism business in its fledgling state, and she makes awesome products, tinctures, and different oils and stuff that can help do a bunch of stuff for you. So check out her Instagram. Yeah, CUSHYTINGS, Cushy Tings. So yeah, check that out. And once I do anything notable, I'll come back on here and.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we'll even have you on while you're on the road next time. You've been a great guest, obviously. We'd love to have you back. Guys, like Nick said, you want to be on the show, message either one of us. We'd love to have you on. Love to have these conversations with people, different perspectives. Share, and most of all, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are going to try and get this into more of an audio format soon, where we can put it on Spotify and other other apps like that. That's a work in progress, but otherwise, that's Ad Hominem signing off. We will see you soon.
Catch you guys next week.